All right, well, I've been gone for a very long time, and it was just impressed upon me that there's a gap between the various notions and ideas that have been developed over the past few months and what's been shared publicly. So here's one set of concepts that's quite important and I think is sort of certainly ready to be shared. And it has to do with this notion of the commons, and more specifically commoning. We're going to talk about that probably a lot over the next year or more. So what is the commons? Conventionally, most simply, there's something along the lines of, like, say, a rainforest, the Amazon rainforest, or the ocean in the western United States. Maybe the Colorado River is a common, meaning it's a thing, generally speaking, oftentimes thought of as a resource that is shared by some large number of people. Right, they share it in common. Less conventionally, but in some sense more importantly or more fundamentally, would be something like our language, like the meaning of words, or our grammar, or the epistemic commons, like the capacity for us to actually know what accurate and true statements look like and work together to collaboratively learn more about what's up. This is another sense of the common, different kinds of commons, more virtual sense of the commons. But I actually want to introduce a different mode of the notion, and I'm going to call this commoning. And here's the point. The point is, we have, for the most part, in the West, particularly in the past several hundred years, made a big error in the topic or the notion of governance. Broadly speaking, we've divided governance into two modes: the market and the state. Right, so there's some sort of tension of like what should be in the market, what should be in the state, blah blah blah. Right. And here's my proposition. My proposition is that there's, in fact, at least a third mode. And that mode is actually more fundamental than the other two. And this is what I'm going to call commoning. And commoning is a mode of governance, right, equal to, say, like the state and the market, a way of supporting collaborative choice making. But also, it is the mode of governance that is appropriate to the commons. So, and here's the key. If we try to govern the commons using the market, it's a mess. If we try to govern the commons using the state, it's a mess. If we try to put them in tension with each other, it's a mess. The appropriate mode for governing the commons is commoning. Okay. And what I would say is a big part of the problem that we found ourselves in is that we have simultaneously almost completely lost the capacity to engage in commoning, so much so that we've actually even lost the notion of what it might be. We have also, therefore, made a real mess of our commons, and that to remember, to rediscover, and to meaningfully reinvent commoning in our current context is a big part of what we need to do. And I'll say this in two ways. Right? In one way, if we want to address problems of the commons, like how do we manage and be in relationship with our atmosphere and our oceans and our natural environment, commoning is going to be the answer. That's a big proposition. That's a heavy thing to put out there. A little bit less heavy, but maybe a little bit easier to get to faster, is virtual environments. Let's go with Facebook, our commons. Facebook is a commons. This is one of the reasons why it's been so terribly governed in the market by Facebook as a company, for example, in the context of market forces. And by the way, why a notion of trying to govern it in the state, the IRF or whatever, the Department of Homeland Facebook Security, is also an equally terrible idea. And the notion of their relationship, can we create regulatory agencies to govern market entities, is actually the wrong idea. The right approach is, can we rediscover, can we remember, can we invent a form of commoning that is in right relationship with, can actually well govern something like the commons of Facebook, the commons of social media. Now, what's really, really interesting, this last little bit, is that very platform, or platforms like that, social media, are uniquely well positioned to actually support that discovery, because the commons and commoning is deeply connected to human beings being in relationship with each other. Right? It's about basically how do mature people have reasonable and good, effective conversations so that they can deliberate on effective choices. And that's kind of the nutshell. And you can imagine that it would be possible, although not probable, that in the context of, say, Facebook, where you actually have, in many cases, like almost all the human beings, and you have the ability for them to engage in conversations, and you even kind of know what their existing relationships are and how those relationships operate, that you could begin the process. A slightly more ethical Facebook could support a more effective commenting. And if that commenting took as its object a slightly more ethical Facebook, you could actually get a positive feedback loop. You could get a reciprocal opening in the direction of actually creating a commenting that was fundamentally capable of stewarding the commons of something like Facebook. But we don't have to rely on the good graces of Mark Zuckerberg. We're going to be doing this ourselves anyway, and we may or may not be using that platform for some part of it. But to rediscover, to reinvent, to relearn, and build competency and capacity and maturity in the context of commenting is a big part of what this whole journey is going to be about.